Ois Gimel, line 27, and we were speaking about we started getting into the 12th Ois of the Friedrich Rebbe's Basi. The Rebbe was explaining what's the idea. By the Eibishter, there's differences. There are the treasures, there are the things that are considered his needs, that the Eibishter doesn't expend his oitzeres for things that are considered his needs. We need to understand what those needs are. And then there's the idea that for something that matters to the essence of the king, which is the victory in the war, beyond logic, not like when we're dealing with the logic of getting spoils of war and so on, that over there is a certain type of cost ratio that's evaluated to see if it's worthwhile and if it makes sense to expend so much and to use up so much energy and resources, as opposed for the sake of victory, which is matters to the very essence. So for that, we tap into the very essence and the levels of the oitzres, of the treasures. So we concluded yesterday with speaking about that the treasures that the king is willing to expend for the war, that is the level that the Ohr Ayn Sof is l'mayla den ketz, l'mata mata den tachlis. It's way up upon high to no end and way below to no end. So now the Rebbe, before he's going to explore later on in Oy Zayin, exploring what does it mean high to no end and low to no end, first he's going to explain what is the idea of Ohr Ayn Sof. Before we get into the no end, the high, low, what's the definition of Ohr Ayn Sof? What does it mean, the infinite light, or light infinite? Ohr, light, Ayn Sof, infinite. Let's see it inside line 27, Ois Gimel. The idea behind this is concerning the term Ohr Ayn Sof. There are two explanations. One explanation is Ohr Shel Ayn Sof, the light of the Ayn Sof, meaning there is Ayn Sof, there is the infinite, capital I, going, let's say, on Hashem's essence, and then there's the light that emanates from it, Ohr of the Ayn Sof. That's the one way of explaining the phrase Ohr Ayn Sof. Peter Shasheni, a second explanation of the word and the term Ohr Ayn Sof. Ohr Atzmoi Hu Ayn Sof. It's not talking about the where the light is emanating from, but actually the word Ayn Sof is a definition of what the light is. The light itself is a light of Ayn Sof. So he's saying, Maamar explains in the Maamar concerning what it speaks about over here, that the light itself is no level that it's Ayn Sof. In other words, the Rebbe says, that the Friedrich Rebbe explains in the Maamar, that what do we mean over here when we say Ohr Ayn Sof? And this is usually, or very often, the way the term Ohr Ayn Sof is understood in Chassidus, is that it's the light itself is Ayn Sof, not the light of the Ayn Sof. So the question is, why? Why do we translate it that way? Why don't we explain it in the other way, the light that emanates and comes from the Ayn Sof? But Tamadavar, the reason why we're saying that it's the light that is Ayn Sof, and we cannot use the term that's the light from the Ayn Sof, because truthfully, Haloshen Ayn Sof, the expression infinite without end only refers and can only apply to the light itself. Or the Mila Yoiser, and even higher, top of page Yud, is the idea of name, to become a pratim, Shem v'Ohr in Yonam Echad, and many aspects, many details. The idea of light and name are one concept. He doesn't go into that now. So he says, why can't we say it's the light of the Ayn Sof? Movable could the Torah Parshas Pekudei, like it's explained in the Torah there. Asks the Sefer Yonis Elam, Sefer Pelach Harimin, these two Svarim of Kabbalah, Lamra Nikra Ohr Ayn Sof. Why is it called the light of, or the light Ayn Sof? In other words, as we'll soon explain, seemingly there is an even higher term that we can call it. There's a greater term that we can call this. What is that greater term that we can call it? He says, seemingly we'll be able to call it, it has no beginning, meaning that he is preceding everything, he is first to everything, because he says as follows, there's an expression, that anything that precedes everything is for sure everlasting, but included in the term nitzchi, everlasting, is not the idea of something that must be first, or like I said, there's an expression actually it says it, kol kadmon hu nitzchi, avaloi kol nitzchi hu kadmon. Every first, in other words, any first, which is there's only one, the Eibishter, who is the first that precedes everything, he is everlasting, but not everything that's everlasting is necessarily first. So he's going to bring now the exceptions where we see that something that's everlasting and is not first. So he says, that even malachim, which are called exalted and removed intellects, in other places he uses the term, there are many creations that fall under the following category, that they are nitzchi, they are everlasting, but they're not kadmon, they're not the first. Hey, nitzchim, they're everlasting. Why are these malachim or these creations everlasting? This is that's by the will of the Eibishter. You're putting a different term, using a different term for nitzchi. That means that they have no end. Though they are something that is new and is created out of nothing. Excuse me. I'm sorry. They are created from nothing to something. What does that mean? Created from nothing to something. It means they have a beginning. So what do we see? Now we're talking about Hashem, to use the term Ayn Sof, to use the term infinite, to use the term everlasting. That is a deficient term. That is a lacking term. Why is it lacking? Because there are many things that are Ein Lam Sof. There are many things that are everlasting. There are many things that go on forever. So therefore, to call Hashem by the term Ein Lo Sof is not, if you will, the ultimate that we could say about him. The ultimate would be to say Ein Lo Tchila, that he has no beginning. And that is unique, because as we said before, other things can have no end. Other things can be everlasting, but only the Eibishter can be Ein Lo Tchila, can be without a beginning. Because he's first. That means there's nothing that began, nothing that he came from. Therefore, they must have a reason we have to have a different explanation of the term Ein Lo Sof. So the Alter Rebbe explains over there in that Maamar the Torah, line 12, the Tiritz, and he explains the Mashal Kodim Ein Sof, that what we call it without end. We do not intend to describe Hashem's very essence, heaven forbid, because he himself is beyond without end. He is without beginning. Rather, when we're talking about that he has no end, it's referring to his name. We said before in the parentheses that name and light is more or less talking about the same concept, as he's about to say. What is the level of his name? That is the level of the light and the ray of Hashem. She'ein lo sof, that it has no end. So going back to what we said at the beginning of the paragraph, we're trying to figure out if Ohr Ayn Sof means that it's a light of the Ein Sof, or that the light itself is Ein Sof, So we're bringing here from the Alter Rebbe that the description, Ayn Sof, the description without end, the description that indicates everlasting, cannot go on Hashem's essence. Rather, it's referring to the light, that the light has no end. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about Ohr Ayn Sof, because Hashem himself would be called Ein Lo Tchila, he has no beginning. Now going back to the expression that we're talking about, the Oitzer of above, that the Oitzer is the Ohr Ayn Sof that's beyond and high to no end and low to no end. The Kivin Shayim in line 15. Since we say this light is higher to no end and below to no end, this means it has no boundaries and limitations. It's understood that the light itself is in the state that it's infinite. That's what it means. In other words, what is the definition that the Ohr is Ayn Sof? So from the very fact that he's saying that it's high to no end and it goes down low to no end, that is the definition of Ohr Ayn Sof, that the light itself has no end. It's so high, it's so unbounded and so unlimited that neither height, neither being totally high, as we'll soon explain what that means, or the idea of coming totally low, nothing stands in its way. There's no end to that. Any questions?
When referring to Hashem, is infinite a limitation?
Yes, but we're not approaching it exactly from that way. Over here, what we're approaching it is infinite still allows one to think that the Eibusher Chas V'Shalom have a beginning because many other things could be infinite. Therefore, rather than the emphasis that the infinite is a limitation, which is correct, the emphasis is that if you're talking about already what he is not, then it's greater to emphasize something which he is uniquely not, which is that he doesn't have a beginning, not just he doesn't have an end.
But isn't time itself is something that came down? It didn't exist before the creation. So it seems
correct.
Like that's
so whatever.
It's irrelevant.
That's why we don't actually use that often the term nitzchi as time, because time itself is a created entity. So we don't use so much the word nitzchi. We prefer the word Ein Lo Sof, which has a much broader connotation, less limited to the sphere of time and place.
So Nitzki's a pre-Simsum description.
Yes. No, Nitzchi is most probably what one would say a post-Simsum or even lower than that description, except in a broader sense, Nitzchi could be the general concept of Ein Sof, the way it's much higher. But essentially, I don't want to get lost now in semantics, or we'll never crawl out of this Maamar. Let's go on further to line 19, second paragraph on Yud. The Maamar explains the reason for the fact that the light itself is no level that it's Ein Sof. So now that we've established that the expression Ohr Ayn Sof is referring to the revelation itself, not referring to the source of the revelation, not referring to the light, to the source of the light. So now the question is, I can understand why Hashem would be infinite, but why would the light be infinite? Well, it's because a classic term that's brought down in Chassidus is that the light is similar to the luminary. The light is the same, has in it characteristics, has in it characteristics similar to the luminary. The idea behind this is, Maamar explained in a different place. The reason that the light itself is in a state that's infinite, is seemingly a paradox, and it's self-contradictory. Because the idea of Ohr is as what is called. It's called Ohr, meaning Ha'ara bilvad. Ohr, we're saying it's a limitation. It's only it's only a ray. It's impossible to say that it's truly something infinite. This means by top of the next page, it has no boundaries and limitations whatsoever. So the very term that you're saying that it's array means something that's defined. You're giving a description. Definition means a limitation. And on this very same breath, you're saying it's Ayn Sof. So it's contradictory. It's an oxymoron. Either it's Ohr, which is a defined thing, or it's Ayn Sof, which is undefined. But the idea behind this is top of page Yud Aleph. Ayn Sof, the fact that the light has no end to it, it's not as a result of the light itself. Since the Ohr, the light comes out of the luminary, Ohr M'ayn Hamaor, and therefore it is similar to the luminary, therefore it has properties similar to the luminary, which is that the luminary has the property of being infinite. So now he's going to elaborate upon this. What's known from the luminary, it's possible to be two types of flow, two types of way that something should come out of the luminary of the source. A type of ashpa that is called light. And a type of ashpa in such a way that's called shefa. Shefa is a flow. It's not an illumination. It's something. It's the thing itself, as we'll soon explain. The difference between the terms shefa and ohr. The difference between the two descriptions of ohr and shefa. The idea of shefa is that it comes out something that's a substance. There's something that comes out. That the flow of water will cover you. But he's trying to emphasize that there is a thing that's coming. It's not that the water remains in one place and something like emanates from the water, but rather it's like a part and a matter of water itself is flowing. That's what shefa means, that you have the thing itself is coming about. That the flow and the drawing down the water from the wellspring, it's in such a way that the very water itself comes out. It's not like you have one thing in the wellspring and something different comes out of the wellspring when it comes onto the above ground. Or as opposed to light, light is something different than the luminary. For example, sunlight. It's not the very matter or the makeup of what the sun itself is. It's not an object like the sun is. It's not an item like the sun is, or like the water is, for example. Rather, it's only a ray of the sun. And because of that, it does not affect any change in the sun. The sun is not affected by the fact if the light is shining or not shining. The sun is just as much sun, whether the light reaches its intended location and so on. And nothing becomes lacking now in the sun because the light comes out. Now that the light comes out, is there any less light in the sun? Did the sun now become taken away from it something? When, let's say, water or anything else that's called shefa, so then it means that in the mashpia now something is less. There is now less water of the wellspring, for example, because now some of that water is on top of the ground. So seemingly, in that regard, ohr is of little consequence. Light is of little consequence because in relationship to the luminary, it's of no significance. But the Rebbe goes on to say, line 13, from this very perspective, because of what it's seemingly lacking, there's an advantage that light has over shefa. Because through the light, there's possible to be a connection and association with the luminary. Lefisha Ohr M'ayn Hamaor, because the light is similar to the luminary. So therefore, in the light is reflected and expressed things of the luminary. Let's explain the previous Maamarim. Through the light, it's possible to recognize the luminary. For example, you could tell, looking at the light, is it candlelight? Is it lavana? Is it moonlight? Or is it sunlight? Amar Makoidnim means early Maamarim in that year in Tavshich Beza, the Rebbe said. Any questions?
Is that called histadlus? Like godliness, as opposed to
Yes, you could use the term. That's why I guess you call the term godliness as opposed to God. Elikus versus Elikah. Yes.
Is
But even higher,
the right term?
It's even higher than say the Vishtalshlus. We're talking here about Ohr Ayn Sof, even talking about even the light before the Tzimtzum could be called Ohr.
This is brought out in the Tanya too, I think.
Yes.
And then the mashal
Okay. Line. Yes.
The mashal is not perfect, of course.
Yes, as usual. Line 19. The Indians this idea that the light is similar to the luminary and has within it many things that we could tell from it, the luminary, it's to such a degree, because the Ohr is M'ayn Hamaor, the Alter Rebbe, as we're singing a quote from the Geras HaKodesh Siman Chaf, the end of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains that the Ohr is the one that's able to create Yesh Ma'ayin, even though essentially the creation of Yesh Ma'ayin is something that should only be possible because of the Ma'or itself. But the Ohr, being M'ayn Hamaor, has in it that property of the Ma'or. Let's see inside. Line 21. Like the Alter Rebbe explains in his well-known Geras HaKodesh. Geras HaKodesh Siman Chaf, chapter Epistle 20, titled by the caption or beginning with the words, "He is one with his life forces," meaning the lights of the spheres, and he is one with the vessels, with the bodies of the spheres. The Alter Rebbe explains over there, the creation of something from nothing comes about from the vessels of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. And how do they do that? They don't do it independently, but in the vessels of the 10 spheres is enclosed the kav that comes from the infinite light of Hashem. Because the light is similar to the luminary. It's the very essence of the emanator, meaning the very essence of Hashem himself. That since Hashem's being comes from himself, and he's not a result from any prior cause that preceded him, heaven forbid. Therefore, only he himself, by his capability, does he have the ability to create something from total nothingness and complete nothingness without any prior cause preceding this yesh. And then the Rebbe goes on to explain the very famous explanation why it needs to be from Hashem's very essence. So he says in line 3, in top of page Yud Beis, creating such a creation, that should not be felt within that creation, that there's some type of cause and some type of thing that preceded him, can only come from such a level, that there's no prior cause that actually preceded it. To be able to make something that thinks that there's nothing preceding it, it has to come from somewhere that nothing actually preceded it. Because if the creation would have been solely and entirely from a level that does have something that preceded it, So then, so then the created being would also have been in this type of way. There would have been constantly felt by the creation that he has some type of cause, because whatever the creator is, it expresses and communicates further down to the things that it creates. So let's say if Atzilus would be the sole reason why the Yesh would have been created. Since Atzilus feels that it came from somewhere, so that feeling would have been also transmitted to what Atzilus creates, and whatever Atzilus would have created would also be aware that it comes from somewhere, which would undo the whole idea of Bechira Chavshis and being able to transform darkness to light, etc. Line 9. Since we see in the creations down here below, that's not felt by them that they have some type of prior cause that preceded them. And from that prior cause, they were created. Even those type of creations, that they are aware and they do feel that there is, they understand fully, they comprehend this intellectually totally, that there is a cause that preceded them, and that cause was from which they were created. Still in all, what's felt by them is what they really feel is the way they were created from nothing to something. Meaning, there's one thing what they are understanding intellectually. Intellectually understand that they couldn't have just landed here out of nowhere. There must be some prior cause, but that's all in the mind. What they feel is that they came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, there was nothing, now there's something. That the nivra is something that is tangible, substantial, something that exists. What do they feel? That the creator and that which brings everything into being is called nothing, that it's not an existence. Behind this means in their feeling, that they feel that there was no prior cause that preceded them. So even though intellectually they know that that's wrong, but in their feeling and their connection, in what permeates them, they sense themselves coming out of nowhere. So therefore, since they have such a sense and such a type of awareness of themselves, and such a, if you will, non-awareness of the creator, how did that come about? Therefore, we must say that their very being, coming into being, comes from Hashem's very essence, the emanator himself. That the Eibishter's very essence comes from himself, from his being comes from his essence. And he's not a result of any cause that preceded him, heaven forbid. That is all where it sources itself from. That is all where the creation begins. But then there's the hands-on aspect of creation. The hands-on aspect of creation is not the Hashem's very essence. Hands-on is the 10 spheres. But the actual creation of Yesh Mayim, Himakelim the Esa spheres, is from the vessels of the 10 spheres. How come? Because Shebehen Melubash Hakav Ohr Ayn Sof, in the vessels is enclosed the kav, the thin line that comes originally and is connected to the infinite light of Hashem. Shiur Ohr Ayn Hamaor, and that light is similar to the luminary, that it's something that it's the Eibishter's essence. So therefore, the light, even though the light is an emanated thing, and even though the light is something that does have a beginning, but it contains in it the properties, it's M'ayn Hamaor, it contains in it the properties that's similar to the luminary, and therefore it's able to be the one that's hands-on, creating something as if becoming directly from Hashem's essence, that is Mitziusim Atzmusay, as we will elaborate on tomorrow. Any questions?